Let's make some sports cookies. This includes a basketball, baseball, soccer ball, and volleyball. Before we can start decorating, of course, we have to mix our royal icing colors and consistencies. I like to start with the lightest color and go to the darkest color. And so we're starting off with white. There's quite a bit of white in this set because it's on the baseball, it's on the volleyball, it's the entirety of the volleyball, and it is on the soccer ball. So we are going for a hybrid consistency. That means this icing is going to do it all. You're not going to have a flood and an outline. You're going to have this one consistency that can flood and outline your cookie. And when you're making a hybrid consistency, you're looking for about a 15 to 20 second icing, or one that flows off your spatula like Elmer's glue. That has never been a great comparison for me, so I like this counting method. So you run your spatula through your icing, like I did here, and then you count 1 1000, 2 1000, 3 1000, 4 1000, 5 1000. I am behind because I didn't start counting when I started this, and you see how long it takes for your icing to settle. That's why you're looking for a 15 to 20 second as soon as it all comes together and settles. The next color we're going for is the orangey brown of the basketball, which was my trickiest color to mix because it's not an easy color to get. I only use primary colors so that when you are mixing your colors, you don't have to have a specific food coloring for every single icing or every single set we do, because it's just annoying to have all these like very niche colors around. So we're using primary colors, which also includes white and black. For this, we're starting off with red and yellow to get us to kind of the right orange, and then a little bit of blue. That is the trick here. The other thing that I have found mixing colors, to get a really good orange, you want 1 drop of red to 2 drops of yellow. It's very similar with green too. You want 1 drop of blue to 2 drops of yellow, because yellow is just a harder color to work with. For the blue, we're not going to do a full drop. We are going to take a toothpick and stick it into our food coloring. So I'm taking the lid completely off. I'm taking my toothpick. I'm getting kind of a decent amount on there where I can touch my icing. The icing is not sticking to my toothpick, so I'm setting that aside, and I'm just doing a little bit at a time because I felt like the orange for the basketball could get too weird too fast. And as I'm mixing this, I'm immediately like, oh my gosh, did I add too much blue? Is this gonna look too muddy? Is this gonna look too gross? But I'm finding it's still not a dark enough orange. So I'm going very slowly. And there's a reason why I usually speed up my mixing, but for this one, I am keeping it pretty much uncut. I am not cutting out pieces because I took this process so slow to get to this specific color I'm going for. So we added 2 more drops of red, 4 drops of yellow, and another toothpick amount onto the icing. And that was actually the same amount I still had on my toothpick. I didn't redip into the blue. And if you do need to redip, please grab a new toothpick so you don't contaminate your food coloring with this royal icing. I don't know what that would do, but I feel like it would do nothing good. Still wasn't a rich enough orange, so I come in with 2 more drops of red, 4 drops of yellow. I'm not even going to tell you how many drops I ended up with in the end, because 1, I have not been counting, and 2, it's totally dependent on how much royal icing you're using. I actually had far more orange than I needed. I do feel like we're getting closer to that kind of like burnt orange you're going for this basketball, but it's a little too bright still, right? This isn't really what a basketball looks like. I feel like this would be a really great orange color, like if I was decorating orange cookies, like the actual fruit. So we're coming in with 2 more drops of red, 4 drops of yellow. One thing I had not considered when it came to mixing this color was if I could have oversaturated, and I think I didn't consider that because every time I added color, the color of my icing changed. And one thing I have found with royal icing and food coloring is this often happens with black and red very common with both of those colors because you keep adding food coloring wanting it to get darker. But what happens with black and red is they just kind of stay like almost a shade of pink or a shade of gray, and the color develops later. So what I found is that if your royal icing is still changing color as you are adding food coloring to it, then you are likely, I say likely because I haven't fully put this to the test, but you are likely not oversaturating your royal icing. And if you do oversaturate, you'll know because you'll get a ton of color bleed from it, and you will also, your icing won't dry. It just won't dry correctly. And I've had it happen a couple of times, and it looks really weird and funky, but I think we have finally gotten to the right color. Maybe just a little bit more blue in there to kind of get that muddy burnt orange. Color theory is wild. Like, it is wild. You just wouldn't think that blue would do this. So now I'm looking to get to the right consistency, which again is that hybrid consistency. So I'm looking for a 15 to 20 second icing, or I'm looking for an icing that falls off my spatula, kind of like Elmer's glue. And I really want to make sure that I'm mixing particularly all of that blue in, because sometimes it can get a little stuck on your spatula. And I'm very happy with this color. I know it's going to look a little bit darker. So you might say, hey, it didn't flow off your spatula. When you don't have enough icing, sometimes it doesn't. And you just kind of get the hang of what that consistency looks like. Now we're going to move on to the red. We don't need very much of this, so I have a very small amount, and you can see I sped this up because you just don't need to see me mixing this icing all that much. I have a very small amount because we're only using red for the stitching on the baseball. And you will see I am not looking to make this a true red because I don't want to oversaturate the color. I just want to keep adding red until that color is not changing anymore in the bowl. So I'm going to mix this in and see, yep, that color definitely got darker. That color changed. My royal icing is a darker color. Let's see if we can get it a little bit darker, a little bit closer to red. And there's a little bit more change, a little darker. You will find, particularly with these really rich colors, when they dry, they will develop even darker, and you'll have people sit and wait for their colors to develop in the bowl. I am impatient. If you're doing this as a hobby, you don't want to sit for 3 hours and wait for your colors to develop. I mean, maybe you do. Maybe that's your life. Kudos to you for having patience and planning that I do not have. But I am just not that way. So with the black, we're doing a similar thing. We're not looking to make black in the bowl. We're looking to make a dark gray. We're looking for the color to no longer develop. And black's also interesting because you end up adding way more food coloring. I don't understand how black gel food coloring works. I should probably look into it if we're being honest. Because you end up adding far more food coloring for black than you do for any of the other colors. And I just feel like the makeup of it must be different. But we're looking for the black for the lines on the basketball and for the hexagons on the soccer ball. So we definitely need a good black here. And I am trying to go slow because the last time I made black, I definitely oversaturated it, and I was disappointed in myself because I knew I oversaturated it and I should have tossed it and just remade it. So now that we have all our colors, we want to go in and cut the ends of our piping bags. I like to keep them completely flat, seam on one side, cut across, turn it 90 degrees so the seam is straight up. You will see there's a little bit of a curve on the end, and I'm just trimming that off so I can have a straight cut right across my piping bag. That helps us have a very easy line coming out of our piping bag and it to not curl. In the free downloadable guide that walks through all the different steps of this sports balls cookie set, there's a better way to say that, but I think it's more fun to say sports balls. There is a template for you to print off specifically for this soccer ball. And what I recommend doing, and I say this in the guide, is to print off this soccer ball template, fold it in half so that you can easily cut out that hexagon in the middle, and then you can get all of the sides, and then you can put this on your cookie like I am doing right here. Come in with your edible pen. You can also use your scribe for this. Now that I have an edible pen, I like using it, and I wish I used it more when I was first decorating. So that you can draw all these little stencils, and then you're going to mark off everywhere that's black, and you're also going to connect all of the lines. So you can see all the points from the hexagons on the side connect to the center one, and then the points on the side connect to each other to create more hexagons. So that template gives you a really great base that you can build off of. And then I am putting an X in the middle of every single one of the hexagons that are going to be black. One thing you might note from what you see here on the screen is that the black hexagons are a little wide. And so one thing I would recommend is maybe trimming those a little bit when you cut out your template, just so they're not as wide, but it looks fine. I kind of edit a little bit as I'm going through piping and cut off those corners so they're not quite as wide, and you'll see me do that. So now you're going to come in with your black and you're going to outline, and you can see I just dropped it a little bit, so I'm going to come in with my scribe, scrape that off. It's okay if we make accidents while decorating. We can take a spatula, we can take our scribe, scrape that off, and just keep going. It's not a big deal, especially on a pretty naked cookie like this. So I'm going to do my outline, and then I like to immediately go in and pipe with my icing still, because I like when the outline kind of gets absorbed into the flood icing. Now, if my icing is a little bit too thin, like it's spreading a little bit too much, what I will do, instead of remixing it because I'm lazy, is I will go outline every single one of the hexagons, and then I'll come back and fill them. So it has that outline has a little bit of time to set up. But I didn't need to do that with this one. I nailed my icing consistency, which I don't always do. And then I'm going to go in with my scribe as soon as I fill in that hexagon. Just make sure that everything's going to the ends and it's completely filled in. And then I'm going to go on all of the other spaces of the hexagon, outline it, and fill it in with black. And you can already see I'm kind of chopping off. I'm not following the outside lines of that hexagon perfectly. I'm going a little bit on the inside of it because I just felt like they were a little too big. And you'll keep filling that in. The trick with these soccer balls is, one, utilize that template. It's going to make your life so much easier. Also, trusting the process of taking your time. And by that, I don't mean just piping slowly so you can get clean lines. I also mean that you need to let each step crust over. And so what I recommend is to, one, do the black pieces of every single soccer ball, set them aside, and then move on to some other cookies. Do like the base of another cookie. I was doing this soccer ball, base black, did all three of the soccer balls because I did three for my set. And then I did the first step of the volleyballs, and then I could come back and the black would be just crusted over. So it's not going to be as shiny. You'll see that when we get to the next step, which does take some time. The soccer ball is going to take your most time on this set, but it's going to pay off. And that crusted over piece is also going to help our black not bleed into the white because it's dried a little bit. It's not completely foolproof. If you added too much black food coloring to your black royal icing, you're gonna get some bleed, and that's okay. I saw a professional wedding cake the other day that had a lot of color bleed on it, and I noticed it as someone who does a lot of cookie decorating, and color bleed is like the bane of my existence. But did anyone else notice it? No. So we just don't need to be such harsh critics for ourselves. That's what I'm trying to get at. If you can have professionals out here selling cookies and cakes that have color bleed and people are loving them and gushing over them, then we don't need to care about our hobby at home when we're getting color bleed. That doesn't mean that we can't work to avoid having color bleed. Of course it's a great thing to work towards, but we don't need to beat ourselves up over it if it happens. It's just not that big of a deal. Truly not that big of a deal. So we only have one more of these sections left, this last kind of edge of a hexagon for black. And then you will set this cookie aside and let it dry. Move on to some of your other soccer balls that you have to decorate. Or if you aren't doing the full sports cookie set, then maybe you're doing some other soccer themed cookies for whatever you're decorating this month. You can move on to some of those as well, while you let this dry and you let this crust over, and you know that you're ready to move on to the next step because it won't look as shiny. And after I fill in this section, you'll see me come back to do some white, and this black will not be nearly as shiny. It'll be a little bit more matte. And if you were to go add more black on top of it, that icing would just kind of sit on top of it. If you've ever tried to fix, like, oh, I accidentally put my thumb in a cookie or something, and you're like, I'll just add a little bit more icing, it won't be that big of a deal, then you know that you can't just add a little bit more icing. So you can see it's still shiny, but it's not as shiny as it was. And so now you're going to go in. You don't want to do any white sections directly next to another white section at this stage. We are just doing white next to black pieces that have dried a little bit. And I feel like I said that in a confusing way. The other thing you're going to want to do is to outline every single piece of your hexagon. Are these still hexagons? They don't look like it, do they? Anywho, shapes. It's been a while since geometry. That should be pretty evident. So I am not immediately going through and piping the white right next to the section I did, because I want to, again, give these sections some time to set up and dry and matte over. And I can do it right against the black because it has had that time. It is what we call crusted over in the cookie world. And the other thing I'm doing here is outlining the section fully. You might think, well, you could just do the two sides that don't have icing next to them, and you can pipe directly next to that black. I find that you don't get a very crisp line, and on a ball like this, you want that crisp line. You want it to be very evident where the seams would be on a soccer ball. And so the last one that I do at this stage, unfortunately, this cookie needs to be done in about 4 different stages because you're not wanting to pipe directly next to fresh icing. So this one, I go onto an outside edge to do that white section and fill it in. And then I didn't really need to use my scribe too much here because the icing evened out pretty much on its own. And then I set this cookie aside and I come back to it after it's crusted over a little. So you can see how shiny it is right here. And then in a moment, it's just a little bit more matte. So it just had a little bit of drying time. And then I'm going to come in and completely outline the section that I'm piping in, the section that I've outlined here. And it doesn't matter whether the section next to it is white or whether that section is black. I'm going to completely outline it because it just helps keep the structure that we're looking for each of these pieces. And now that I have said pentagon and I'm looking at this, or hexagon, the center is a pentagon and the rest are hexagons, and I don't know what happened, but it works, and I didn't notice it until right now. And so I'm not going to care about it. And now I'm questioning whether that's how soccer balls look or not. And I might have to look it up later, but I'm not going to worry about it. It's not going to be a big deal. So I filled in that section. I didn't stop and pull out a scribe because these have kind of self-leveled pretty well. My white's self-leveling pretty well. And so I'm just going to move on to the next section. And this is between 2 black pieces that are dried and 2 white pieces that are dried. And so we're just continually looking to fill in a section that is either surrounded by blank areas or by sections that have already crusted over a little bit, not going directly next to a section that I have just piped. So we outline it and then we fill it in. Another tip that I have is I saw someone called it the blob and lift method. And I liked that terminology of you do a little blob of icing touching the cookie and then you lift and you can get a much straighter line. And it also can overlap with some of the other sections and it still look great. So we're going to do our last one for this piping, session before we set this aside to dry again. And this is what I mean by you're doing it in 4 different stages. The first stage is all of the black sections, so they have plentiful time to dry. The second stage is 3 of the white pieces. The third stage is another 3 of the white pieces. And then the fourth stage will be the last 4 white sections. And you can see with this one, the icing didn't self-level very well, so I'm coming in with my scribe to just make sure that everything's where it needs to be. I set it aside to crust over again, and we're going to come in and do these last pieces. And so I'm just touching the cookie a little bit, that little blob and lift, blob, lift, blob, lift. It's kind of fun to say. I don't know if I would really say blob because you don't really want to have like a glob of icing. You just want a touch of icing and then lift and direct it where you want it to. And there's a little bit of space over on the side, so I'm going to take my scribe and just lightly push my icing where I want it to go. And then we're going to move on to these last 3 sections. Blob and lift, blob and lift, blob and lift. And I don't always go in like a full circle when I'm doing this because I just don't feel like I have the visual to be able to do it well a lot of the times. But again, coming in, outlining, filling with my flood, using my scribe to push the icing wherever I want it to be if I need it to fill in any sort of sections. And another thing you'll just see me do right there is I got started and I didn't like how my icing was flowing, so I just put it in the middle of the cookie. Well, in the middle of the section I'm filling in because it's going to be white anyways, so I don't need to go put that on a paper towel or something. I can just dab it on the cookie and it'll become part of the section, which is I'm going to need anyways because it's all white on that section. And I'm just using my scribe to kind of fill in any of the holes that were left after I outlined it, because maybe I didn't outline it perfectly. That's okay. But doing the outline first is going to help create just better lines and better dimension for this cookie altogether. And we're just on this last section. So of course I'm going to have a weird funkiness with my icing. We're going to fill in that section one last time, grab our scribe so that we can even everything out. We can make sure that the icing's going where it needs to be, and there is our soccer ball. The basketball was the most satisfying cookie to decorate in this set because you're just putting on this burnt orange base and then you're doing the black lines. And the black lines I was very nervous about doing, but they ended up working out. So it's so satisfying because I cut a very perfect hole on the end of my piping bag. So I had a pretty thick line. You're going to outline your cookie. And since I had a thick hole, I didn't have to go over that outline a few times. Sometimes I'll do 2-3 outlines of a cookie before I fill in the center. And then I went from the center out, so I just give that outline a little bit of time to settle before I put pressure against it with the inside flood of this cookie. And I'm kind of going all the way to the outside edge for this flood, and it looks like it's going to overflow in a couple areas, but that's okay because I'm going to grab my scribe and I'm just going to mix it in. And you can also see some areas where my blue didn't mix in very well. I just didn't do a great job mixing. That's okay. I'm going to use my scribe to mix that into the orange completely as well. So we're not going to have streaks in there. And it's a little hard to see because there's glare because this is fresh icing, but that's why I'm doing this mix kind of in the middle. And then I do my little helicopter laundromat washing machine mix. That's what I like to call it. After that has crusted over, you can see it went from very glossy to semi-glossy. We're going to come in with the black, and you want to start on the side, letting your icing fall out of the piping bag. You can see I'm not touching the cookie at all. We're doing one long curved line and then two much more pronounced curved lines on either side of that one. And then you're going to do just one single line across. And I'm letting my icing fall out of the piping bag before I'm kind of lightly touching it to the side. And then that is our basketball cookie. For the volleyball cookie, we're going to start with the edible pen like we did for the soccer ball cookie. But instead of using a template for this one, you just kind of roughly go into the middle and draw a curved line out. And you're trying to stay in thirds, but it's not the biggest deal if it's not perfect. It's still going to look like a volleyball. And then you're going to do two curved lines that follow a similar pattern as that first one you're mimicking, if that at all makes sense, which I feel like I didn't do a great job of explaining that. So hopefully the visual paired with this is helpful. And similar to the soccer ball, you're going to be doing this cookie in, I think, 3 different steps where you want to outline different sections with white. You want to outline and fill different sections with white, and you don't want them to be touching. You're going to want to set aside that, let that icing crust over so you can come back, do more sections. And what this is going to do is allow each section of this volleyball to have the dimension that you see on a volleyball because they are all sewn together pieces. They're all separate pieces. So that's what we want this cookie to look like. So I've outlined it. I'm coming in, I'm filling it, I'm flooding the center. If I went slower on my flood, I wouldn't even have to come in with my scribe and correct this, but that's just not how I decorate. So I come in with my scribe, I'm evening things out, I'm making sure it comes all the way to the edges, and then I'm going to grab my icing again and do another section that's not going to touch this at all. So there's 2 other places that I'm going to pipe in this first round. See if you can predict where they are, because I don't want these 2 other sections to touch the one that I started with. So there's really only 2 other places I could do this. I guess there's technically more than 2 other places I could do this, but how I'm planning for the future sections I'm going to pipe, there's only 2. If you feel like I could have planned this better, please let me know in the comments, because as I'm watching this, I feel like there's maybe a faster way I could have done this. But again, outline the section, fill it with your flood, use your scribe to even it out if you need to. And then you're going to do one final section on this first round. Again, none of these pieces are touching. That is why we can fill them right now. Because if we were to outline and flood every single one of these, you would have sections that just blend into each other. They wouldn't look separate at all. And by the end, you might have like a little definition. Maybe there's like a little bit of dry time as you went through these, but it wouldn't be as defined as you're going to see at the end that this volleyball has. I really wanted to make this set into a set of all the sports that I have done. And I did do volleyball. I did 3 of the sports that are in this set. And I would have done a water polo ball instead because that is a sport I played in college. But I didn't want to mix a different color, and water polo balls are yellow. But they look exactly like this. So if you want to do a water polo ball, just mix some yellow icing and follow these same exact directions, because they have the same pattern on water polo balls that they do on volleyballs. So this crusted over a little bit. You can see it's not as glossy, the icing that is on the cookie. So now we're going to come do another section. So these can touch the previous sections we did. This is very similar to how we decorate the soccer ball in this sports set as well. We're doing it in stages, so we allow previous sections to crust over so they can keep their dimension as we add more icing to this cookie. And again, if you have patience when you are filling your outlines, you probably will not need to come in with your scribe. I know there are plenty of cookiers who hate having to pull their scribes out because you got to clean them off. You're just setting your piping bag down. I am not that person. I'm happy to pull my scribe out. Totally a personal preference. So as we are decorating again, we don't want fresh sections of icing. So the ones that are really glossy, and you can see the comparison kind of looking in the middle of your screen. The last section I just did compared to the line above it or the line to the left of it, they're just slightly more matte than the really glossy one we have in the middle. So that's the difference you're looking for. It doesn't need to be fully dry. It just needs to be, again, what's called crusted over in cookie decorating. And so I'm coming in and doing 3 more sections on this round, and then the last round will leave us with 3 sections left to fill in as well. And you just want to make sure that none of your sections are touching other fresh icing. And again, similar to the soccer ball, you're outlining the full section. And I just find this helps you get really crisp lines in between. So you can, there are definitely some people who would just say, oh, you just need to line the top and the bottom of this section. You don't need to do the sides because it's surrounded by 2 other decorated pieces already. And you can do that. You can play around with it, see what you like. I find that I just don't have as clean an edge when I do it that way. And so I prefer to outline the section fully. I'm going to grab my scribe, make sure that's evened out, make sure it's everywhere I want it to go. And then I'm going to set this cookie aside, let it dry a little bit, move on to my other volleyball cookies, maybe move on to some other cookies in this sports set, and then I'll come back to it like I did right now when those have crusted over so I can finish with the last 3 sections. And you're going to want to outline those sections, every single piece, and then fill it in with the same icing. One thing I debated with this cookie is if I wanted to have black outlines, maybe outline the whole thing with black first and then come in with the white, but I ultimately decided that wouldn't look right. That would look more true for a water polo ball than it would for a volleyball. Volleyballs don't really have those hard lines on them like a water polo ball does. I also debated doing that on the basketball, but the basketball in this set I thought looked better with the black put on after it had crusted over a little bit, and those black lines kind of sink down into it, and it just worked out really well. If you haven't looked at the basketball yet, look at it. It's my favorite in this set. It just looks so perfectly well done. So we have 2 more sections to decorate. And again, we're outlining. These are all sections that aren't being piped directly next to other sections that were freshly piped. These are sections that have dried a little bit. You can see the difference in what the icing consistency looks like. They're holding their shape, the previous ones that we piped and we set aside. So they're not blending with the new icing we're putting onto the cookie. And you can see the difference in how glossy the new icing is compared to just a little bit of gloss on the ones that have crusted over, have gone a little bit more matte. And coming in with the scribe to even things out, to make sure I get a little sharper, crisper corner on the side, and making sure I'm not going to overflow the edge. If I feel like my icing is making its way to overflowing the edge, I'll take my scribe and just push the icing towards the center. So just kind of trying to redirect it to the choice I want it to make. It doesn't always work, but a lot of the times it works. And we're going to fill in this very final section of our volleyball, filling it in. And I definitely am like, yes, I'm almost done. I'm feeling impatient because this is how I am when I decorate cookies. Coming in with my scribe one final time, evening everything out. And that leaves us with our wonderful volleyball. You'll want to grab your edible pen for the baseball as well. And you're just going to draw 2 curves. You're just going to freehand it, creating that kind of like base of what a baseball looks like. And if you feel like you didn't freehand it well, just go back over it because all of this is going to be covered in icing. We're going to start by outlining that center piece that we just drew the curved lines of onto the cookie. We're going to do those pieces first, and then the outline of the cookie on the top and the bottom of that section. So the middle of our baseball is what we're going to fill in first. And I'm just making sure I have a very clear border so I can fill in with the same icing. That's our hybrid icing here. It does the outline, it does the fill. And I'm just going to go over these lines again because sometimes I like to have a very clear delineation. I find it helps with the icing not overflowing. Sometimes the icing just overflows. Sometimes it's just a little too thin. But if I create a really firm wall with my outline, if I go over it a couple times, then I can kind of prevent that from happening. And then I'm coming in with my flood, and sometimes I go directly against that outline. Sometimes I start in the middle and work my way out. It's a choice. There's not a ton of rhyme or reason to it, and I'm just going back and forth. There is no right way to flood a cookie. You do not have to do it in any sort of prescribed manner. Most of the time, and you'll see this with a lot of cookiers online, how we flood for a video we're recording is different than how we flood when we're just decorating cookies. Sometimes you'll go in these really nice sweeping motions, but most of the time my hand hurts and I'm readjusting and I'm changing how I'm flooding. As you can see, I did right there of let's stop going in sweeping motions. Let's just fill in this section. And then I'm going to come in with my scribe, even everything out. Make sure I fill in all of those little spaces. And I'm going to do that on both sides. It also helps you kind of dissolve away that outline so it's not as apparent when you're looking at the cookie that there's an outline and a fill. After that has matted over, so in the full sports cookie set, I recommend kind of going through some of the other cookies. There's a lot of stages of decorating in this set, so there's a lot of opportunity to kind of switch up what you're decorating and allow for dry time. And so that's what you're going to want to do with this baseball as well. You're going to let that crust over a little bit, get a little bit matte. It's not going to be as glossy so that you can come in and do the outside edges. And they're not going to blend into one another. And most of my icing is pretty self-leveling with this white, so I don't need my scribe's not doing a ton of work, but I'm just making sure I'm getting right to those corners so everything is as crisp and filled in as possible. And for these outside edges, you're going to want to outline all of the area, not just the outside of the cookie, but also against that curved intersection, so that you can have a clear delineation again between each section. And then you're going to come in and fill with your flood and just go slow. And again, there's no rhyme or reason. There's no correct way to flood. As long as you are staying inside the lines and you are adding enough icing, that is the correct way to flood. Everyone has their little personal preferences when it comes to flooding a cookie, and it doesn't matter. After that has dried again, after that has crusted over, you're going to come in with the red. And I liked the best doing angled angled short red lines on one side. And I apologize for it really focusing on my thumb and not so much the cookie, but hopefully you can get the idea here. You're doing short angles. If you really want to be precise about it, you could probably come in with a little edible pen or something and mark where you want to put these lines. I didn't feel it needed to be so specific. And then you're going to turn your cookie around and keep that same, it's almost like an arrow shape of those stitches on your cookie. And one thing I learned looking up how to decorate, or not how to decorate, what baseballs look like to come up with these directions for decorating this cookie is that the arrows will go one direction on one side and another direction on the other side. And that's because all the way around the baseball, the stitching is kind of done in one singular direction. But when you look at a baseball, especially at this angle, it looks like they're two different directions. I feel like I explained that really poorly again, but hopefully you understood what I was saying. So now we're going to repeat this again, going one side, angling up, and just doing little short lines. And it might be helpful to practice doing this on a paper towel so you can kind of do that blob and lift method where you're just dabbing the cookie slightly and then lifting up your icing and letting it fall onto your cookie so you can have very clear lines. And we're going to turn the cookie and complete those arrows on the other side of that seam. So the helpful thing about the seam lines on the baseball, you might think, well, that felt a little unnecessary, but it's giving you guidelines for how to pipe on these stitches, these red stitches. It's giving you that line to work towards and to work from so you can have very clear stitches and a guideline for your stitches. And that completes the baseball cookie. That is your whole sports cookie set. Try it for yourself. Let me know how you like it.